Okay, I want to talk about consumer surplus. You can see we're looking at consumer surplus up here. And this is just a demand curve, right? So this demand curve is a graphical representation of behavior, okay? And you can see that this demand curve, we're going to have our price be 10 and our quantity be 20, okay? Now, what this curve means is, and you can see there's 15 up here, so where the demand curve hits the y-axis, that's at 15. What that means is that this person here would pay $15 for this good, okay? Now, we're going to get into the next unit talking a lot about utility, which essentially is the satisfaction you get from a good. Essentially, it's what you would pay for a good regardless of price, okay? So let's say that there's this one person here who'd pay $15 for this good, okay? And let's say that there's this many people who would pay, $14 for the good. And then there's this many for 13, and this many for 12, and this many for 11. Okay, what that means is there are lots of people out there who would actually pay a lot more than the $10, right? This guy up here paid $15. There's girls here who pay 13 and 14, whatever. And so there are all these people who would pay more than 10. $10 is the price that the market has established. $10 is the price that we're going to give regardless of our utility, regardless of how much we want the good. If we choose to buy it, we will pay $10. Okay? So what that means is that all of this area right here, if you are in this area, if you would pay $14, or if you'd pay $13, or if you'd pay $12, or if you'd pay $11, or even if you'd pay like $10.50, if you pay any of those amounts, you're feeling like you're coming out ahead only paying $10. So what you're experiencing is what we call consumer surplus. For example, for one person, if your utility, right, if what you're going to pay, what you'd be willing to pay is $15, but the actual price of the good is $10, that means you're experiencing a consumer surplus of $5, right? So if your utility is 15 and the price is 10, you're coming out $5 ahead, right? If the utility is $14, if there's some girl will pay $14 for this good, but the price is 10, then your consumer surplus is 4, right? If the utility is 13, if your utility is 13, the price stays at 10, your consumer surplus is 3. If you pay $13.50 and the price is only 10, then you're coming out $3.50 ahead, right? You're experiencing consumer surplus. And what that also means here is, let's say that you'd only pay $8. If you'd only pay $8, the price is 8, you're just not going to buy it, right? If the amount of money that you're going to pay for this next good, we call it margin utility. If your margin utility is, and we'll get to that a lot, so I'm using the term now, but we'll get to it. But if your utility for this good is only $8 and the price is 10, then you're not going to buy it. So all of this area here represents how much consumers are coming out ahead because the price is 10. Now, if the price dropped down to 8, that means that the consumer surplus would get bigger, right? If the price dropped to 12 or went up to 12, that means the consumer surplus would be smaller. Okay? Next, and you can figure this up, I'll give you the same curve, right? Here's quantity and price. Here's our demand curve. Here's 10 and 20, and then here's 15, right? So this is the same thing as this. I'm just cleaner now, okay? So there might be a question that says, how much is our total consumer surplus? So how much are we coming out ahead as consumers if the price is $10? If the price is $10 and the height of our demand curve where it hits the y-axis is 15, what's our consumer surplus? Now that would change if this ends up becoming 16 or 20 or 50 or whatever. But if this is 15, right, and the actual price is 10, and the equilibrium quantity is 20, what's our consumer surplus? Well, in the real world, our curves are a little bit more curved, right? They're not linear, which would necessitate calculus. But we're not doing this. This is an algebraic economics class, right? So essentially, don't we already know how we can figure up the area of this, right? isn't this a triangle, right? In a right triangle, so isn't it 1/2 base times height? And so this would tell us how to find the consumer surplus. So it'd be 1/2, the base is 20, right? The height is 5, right? 15 to 10 is 5. So it'd be 1/2 of 20 times 5, which is 100, and 1/2 of that would equal 50. So our consumer surplus is $50. And we got that by figuring up the area of this triangle, and we just use a quantity, price, in the top of this utility to figure out the consumer surplus. It's really important because as prices change, right? As prices change and quantities shift, that gives us more or less consumer surplus. And what we're going to find out once we start putting producer surplus on top of this is that we find that markets are at their most efficient when consumer and producer surplus are maximized. We call that increasing total welfare, okay? And most of the markets out there are not efficient, and we call them having market failure. Some of those markets fail for a bunch of reasons, and the government comes in to actually make them more efficient. And some of them aren't too bad, and the government makes them less efficient. And so it's the economist's job, one of the jobs of economists, if you're a microeconomist, is to figure out, if you're working with a government economist, which markets could be more efficient if the government did certain things, or which markets could be more efficient if the government got out of certain examples. And efficiency, like how we see efficiency and how we see total welfare changes, because how we see it as an individual producer is different than how society might see it. And we're going to get into that a lot. It's called our marginal social cost and our marginal social benefit and how those things play out. But that is going to be using the idea of consumer surplus. And it's really important you guys understand that.